Hello and welcome to Crafty Crandall. Today I have a real-time paint with me video and a sketchbook unboxing. So the sketchbook that I'm unboxing here is the Etchr Labs 100% cotton hot press sketchbook. It is in the A4 size and it is 200 GSM paper. And like I said, it's a hot press sketchbook. So that's what's really unique about this, is that I personally have never used a hot press sketchbook or any hot press paper at all for my watercolor paintings. And so honestly, I'm really excited to see how this piece turns out, and I am interested to see how I can continue using this sketchbook for, creating new pieces that I'm not used to creating. I have since used this sketchbook for gouache, and I found it really useful in using it with gouache. As someone who's not great at using gouache, I thought that it worked really well. Now, you will see me in this video struggling a bit with the watercolor though. As someone who primarily paints with watercolor, I am not used to using hot press paper, and so this was truly an adventure. Now, after the unboxing, you will see my painting setup. I had my reference directly in front of me, which we will see in just a moment. I had my lights overhead and got ready to paint. Now, the reference is of First Lake in Old Forge. I was kayaking there with my family a couple of weekends ago, and I took this video and I wanted to recreate that with paint. So I decided to do so in my large scale Etchr sketchbook because it was a sketchbook that had, like I said, a large size, and it had not only a large size but a large landscape size, which is something I don't really do a lot of. And so not only is this an adventure in that I have never used hot press paper, it is also an adventure in that I don't typically use large pieces of paper to do my illustrations. I tend to be a smaller watercolorist, and I do appreciate having like a smaller working area, although this was a lot of fun to do, and I think I'm going to try to do more large-scale landscape pieces like this. What you see me doing here is just laying down some water. One thing that I found with this hot press paper is that it does not hold water as well as a cold press paper. I think a lot of that has to do with just the texture of the paper. It allows the water to evaporate more quickly, and so I found that I could not achieve the same effects that I typically can with cold press paper, even though I tried to do so. We'll see that a couple of times. At various points I try to either use like a wet on wet technique, or I try to dab the paint, and unfortunately I was too late in doing so, so it didn't end up working and I was stuck with what I had. So I've got a lot to learn as far as using hot press paper for watercolor illustration, and I'm excited to have this paper available to try. I mean, that's the point of a sketchbook, is to, experiment, learn new things. So that is primarily what this sketchbook is going to be used for. You see here, whenever I start a landscape painting, I usually start with the sky like this. You see that I am struggling a little bit with the sky, so this would typically be where my wet and wet technique would disperse the paint out more and would just create this really nice like butterflying effect with the paint. But in this case, it just wasn't working. I kept going over it with the brush and just adding a lot of directionality where I didn't really want it. I mean, the sky should be pretty uniform in color. I should have been able to get a nice flat wash with a nice gradient coming off, but unfortunately, it just wasn't the case with this piece. I tried and I just wasn't having any luck. So here you see me realize that and just work with it, because otherwise I was going to be stuck with the sky for a very long time. I also had to move my clip because I originally intended on painting a much thinner version of this painting, I was intending on leaving like a bold white stripe both at the top and at the bottom. Now you'll see at the end that doesn't end up happening, but you know, it worked out okay in the end. But here again, I'm trying to get that paint to, you know, move, but it just doesn't want to move. And then there I am dabbing at the sky, not really getting as much paint removal as I would have wanted. So I think this is a good word of caution for everyone who is moving from cold press, like, you know, a good familiarity with cold press paper. Moving into using hot press paper is, you might want to do some experimenting first. This, like I said, is my very first time using it. I have never used it previously, and so this, I guess, is my quote-unquote experimentation process with this paper. I have now learned that I need to be quicker if I want to dab paint off, and I need to, I guess, be more thought out in my piece construction, because using my typical methodology isn't going to work with this, and I'm going to have to create a new methodology to use with hot press paper, because as you can see, I continually try to add water to paint that I've already laid down, and it just doesn't function the same as it would on a cold press paper. I mean, on a cold press paper, that would have moved the paint up, it would have butterflied well, and I would be done with that section. One thing that was a little bit difficult with this landscape is that I wasn't sure how to paint the water relative to, you know, the sky color and the greens of the rest of the piece. So here you see I am rewatching my reference photo to try to figure that out, and I think I ended up doing an okay job. I think I used the function of the paper pretty well here. However, again, I have a lot more to learn. This was actually sort of more of like a happy accident to occur. I was pleased with the outcome, but it took a lot of doing, and I couldn't have expected the outcome that I got. So, you know, I will channel my inner Bob Ross here and be thankful for the happy accident that occurred in the water, particularly this section where it's really reflecting more of just the sky. I think this section actually turned out pretty well. Now a little bit more about the reference and where I am. So this is, like I said, First Lake in the Adirondacks, and I'm actually very excited. I'm going to get to return there very soon to go canoeing this time. I went kayaking with my family, and it was a really, really great time. I, in addition to never having used hot press paper before, had only kayaked once in my life, and it had been on like a really like tranquil, easy moving stream as opposed to in a lake. So I got to learn what a fun exercise endeavor kayaking was. I absolutely love working out, so this was a really good physical challenge and also just absolutely breathtaking. Old Forge is just a really amazing area. I'm really grateful to live near it and get to experience it pretty often, both in the summer months and also in the winter months, as they have a snowboarding mountain there, and I do love me some snowboarding. Here I am just mixing up a darker gray color for the water. The water tone is kind of, I don't want to say black, but you know, in reality it's a pretty dark tone. And I don't think that my illustration ended up capturing that. However, I do think that I tried. You see me mixing up the dark gray color. I think that a dark gray color is useful if you retain enough of your light shades to kind of capture the reflections. Water is one of those things that I do tend to struggle with painting, even though I tend to paint water pretty frequently. I would say that water is one of those things that I paint a lot of. And yet I still have not mastered or, you know, really even gotten good at making water look realistic with watercolor. Again, I think that it came out okay until I add the reflection for the trees. You'll see I end up, I don't know, messing up the painting there. But in this portion, I think it ended up turning out okay until I messed it up. It's just really difficult because with watercolor you have to retain your like white space if you want any white space, and I didn't want to apply any masking fluid to this paper, although I'm sure I will test that in the future. For this particular piece, I just wanted to keep it relatively simple, like just use the watercolors that I know and love and try to test out the paper, you know, so that I understood the functionality with like the base level of all of my usual painting criteria. So yes, I could have applied masking fluid to retain some of that white space. I chose not to, and now I have to deal with the consequences of that decision. So here I'm trying to lift some of the paint and redirect it so that I've got more like the shape of waves on my piece. And while I think in the end it turned out okay, getting there was kind of a struggle. Alright, I'm going to leave you here for a bit of just background music while you watch me paint, and I will come back in with some more voiceover in a minute. Enjoy. And I'm back. Now, one thing about these clouds is that because I don't yet understand how to adequately remove paint from this hot press paper, like I go through all of these clouds, I keep adding water, and then I don't dab at them quick enough to actually make the removal process effective. So I end up with just like a really muddy sky tone that doesn't really work out that well. The clouds could have really used a less blue toned gray to start with. I think I should have just used like a really watered down black instead, and then added the blue back in when I went back through the sky to add more of like a rich sky blue tone. I think that would have worked a lot more effectively, and for future pieces wherein I try to add clouds, I at least know that now. Here, like I said, I waited way too long to try to take the water off because that's what I'm used to doing with cold press paper. You have to let it sit there for a little while, otherwise the pigment is not going to get into the paper. Well, with hot press paper, it's a lot more immediate. The pigment is right there in your paper. It does not take nearly as long for hot press paper to absorb pigment as cold press paper. And I guess I didn't quite understand that when using this paper. So you'll see me dab it away. And I had intended to get more of the pigment from like the initial wash off, and it just ended up looking streaky and gross. So that was unfortunate, and it was like a setback with this piece. But as this is all just a learning experience, I think that what this imparted on me was not only, you know, some of these skills that I need to hone with hot press paper, but also just a respect for learning a new tool in my watercolor toolbox. I am, you know, really grateful that I was able to afford such an expensive sketchbook to try this out in. I mean, this sketchbook wasn't cheap. It was around $35. And so, you know, I'm grateful to have it and to be able to use it to learn these skills. But I am still under a learning curve, and as I think you can see in this painting, I am just getting more and more frustrated with it. And that's another thing. I think it's really important to demonstrate your failures sometimes. I mean, I post things on my Instagram that I don't like because I want to demonstrate to anyone who might be following me that not every art piece is going to be perfect. You're not going to like everything that you produce, and that is okay. That is part of the learning process, and I just really like to demonstrate that in as many ways as possible for younger artists who are looking to improve and get into this. They need to understand, you know, trial and error is a thing. I think that in the world of participation trophies and just everybody is doing amazing, and the world of social media displaying like a false reality to everyone, I think that we're kind of lacking in that understanding that, you know, learning is not always going to give you 100% of the results 100% of the time. Part of figuring things out and learning is to make mistakes, and that was definitely what this process kind of helped teach me as well. Is that, you know, here I am thinking, you know, this piece is going to be not easy, but doable at least with my current skill level. And doing this piece the way that I did it in a new, not a new medium, but in a new paper type and in a new fashion, in that this was a much larger scale than I would normally paint as well. It just taught me, you know, you need to be patient, you need to hone your skills, and you need to accept failure when it happens. I mean, here you see me coming in again with the paper towel, trying to figure out how this is going to work. Now, this time you saw me dab at it much sooner, and I think it was a lot more effective at removing the pigment. However, you can see that it still resulted in a really splotchy result. And that's just not what I'm familiar with coming from a cold press paper background. I can generally anticipate when I'm removing paint what the result will be. And let me tell you, this was not the result that I was expecting. So, you know, a lot to learn here, and just a lot to be grateful for as far as, you know, the ability to try this out and learn from it. The nice thing with this medium is that I am excited to continue, and I am excited to continue improving. I've gone through other artistic supplies and artistic endeavors and have really felt discouraged to the point that I didn't want to continue with them. There's been a couple of times where I've tried acrylic painting or charcoal or that sort of thing and have absolutely hated it and didn't want to continue. So at least with this, I felt comfortable enough with the medium to give it another shot and continue working with it. Like I said in the beginning, I have since done a gouache piece in this sketchbook and very much enjoyed that process. So while I still have to go back through and try another watercolor piece with this sketchbook, which I, again, am excited to do, I at least know that I will use it for gouache in the future because I very much enjoyed the gouache process using this sketchbook. I apologize if you hear any extraneous noise. My tenants downstairs, or the other tenants downstairs, not mine, I don't own this building, are slamming the door, so there's nothing I can really do about that. Going back to the painting though, I do really like how these waves right in this particular spot came out. Although it was a little bit difficult to achieve, I had to keep going in with clean water to make kind of a waved effect. I do think it actually turned out quite good, and I'm very happy with that. I now know that if I apply enough water with enough pressure, I can eventually get the paint to move. It's just a lot more strenuous process than I'm used to. I feel like with hot press paper, you have to work for it a lot more than you do with cold press, which is why I think a lot more people use cold press paper as their default watercolor medium. That much became abundantly clear through painting this water scene. I definitely don't think that I struggle this much generally with water, and so that was kind of an eye-opening experience using this. As far as the trees are concerned, I'm actually pretty happy with how they turned out. I started out with just like the base mid-tone colors, and then after I had finished kind of moving forward with the water a little bit more, I tried to add some of the shadow tones in and just really kind of establish my tree colors a little bit more. I will say that I did not achieve the level of detail that I was kind of hoping to with these trees. Trees have always been something that I've struggled with, and I am definitely getting better, but still have a long way to go with my trees as well. And because the trees were such a forefront of this composition, it was really important to me to kind of get them right. And while I don't necessarily think that I quote unquote got them right, I do think that I did a much better job with them than I necessarily anticipated that I would. Like I said, trees have always been a struggle, so I go into every single tree illustration knowing that I'm going to have trouble with it and that I'm going to have to work with it a little bit more than most of the other things that I work with. It was interesting because, as you can see in the illustration, the trees were kind of uneven in how high they extended on either side, and I was definitely at this point closer to the right-hand side of the lake, so I could see a lot more of the trees on the right-hand side, and then when I shifted over to the left, it was kind of a further away landscape. So trying to convey that in this, tiny landscape painting was somewhat difficult, although I think that I did a decent job in the end. Please excuse my head as I try to get a few of the details in there. Hi, I'm new to YouTube and I'm not quite sure what I'm doing yet, so yeah, there you have it. Newbie rookie mistake. But here you just see me trying to build up the tones for the trees that I at least can see in the leftmost corner of the illustration. And I do think that the right hand side trees ended up turning out better than the left hand side trees, but I am glad that I at least put the amount of detail into the left hand side that I did. I think that they ended up okay, to my standard of trees. They came out pretty good. It was difficult, I found, to add a lot of the more little details. I think I really would have benefited from using a smaller brush for this. I, for whatever reason, didn't transition to a smaller brush, even though I have them. So in the future, if I were to repaint this landscape, I would definitely want to transition into a smaller brush for this. I also think that I could have gotten a little bit deeper with my green tones. I started to here in the middle a little bit, and then after that I kind of got scared of adding too many dark green colors, but in reality, if you look at the reference, it's very dark green for a lot of the trees, and I could have really benefited, I think, from adding some darker like navy blue or Prussian blue tones into the trees. I think that would have really helped bring out the depth of the trees a lot more, and unfortunately I just didn't do that. I do tend to get nervous when it comes to trees, trying to not make them look too blue. So I do try to add a lot more brown and yellow tones into my greens when I'm doing, you know, foliage, and try to stray away from blue as much as possible. However, as this is a very like pine tree-esque landscape, it maybe probably could have benefited from some more deep bluish green tones. Now, unfortunately, I did not push those tones here, but I think in the future I at least learned that maybe I want to push it a little bit further. It's funny, I actually, in the gouache piece that I did use a lot more of those darker green tones. So if you want to check out that piece, I will have it linked below. It's on my Instagram account. I do not have any video footage of me painting it because I want to try to keep, you know, some of my Instagram content exclusive to Instagram. I don't want to create a video for every single piece that goes on my Instagram. That's just a personal preference thing. I hate when I'm following an artist and I've already seen all of their content because I've watched their YouTube videos or vice versa. So I want to try to have like as diverse a content as possible while still having some of the same content appear on both. Like this piece, for instance, I did post also on my Instagram and referenced the fact that there would be a video. So if you're coming from my Instagram, hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. I appreciate you transitioning over, and I would love to hear your thoughts as to what you think as far as diversifying my content. Should I keep separate Instagram and YouTube content, or do you generally prefer having, you know, the same content portrayed in both ways? Do you want a more aesthetic Instagram feed with content that you've already seen in videos, or would you prefer to have exclusive content for Instagram that you may not have seen in YouTube videos that, you know, may or may not be as aesthetically portrayed, or may not have like a video component to them for you to see like the behind the scenes? Curious to know that. If you are a fellow artist watching this, I would absolutely love to know what your Instagram strategy is, if you have a YouTube channel, or, you know, what your thoughts are on the matter. I'm always looking to provide better content and improve what I'm portraying as far as my artwork is concerned, and this is like some of the things that I think about. Here you just see me continuing to add more of the green tones of the trees. I did take a while to build these up, and while I think that, like I said, they turned out okay, it did take quite some time. Again, I apologize for the extraneous noise. This time it's my cat Elsa running around. Hello, Elsa. She says hello to all of you. I think at this point I will leave you to some more fun background music, and I will catch you once we've progressed a little bit further into this painting. I promise it won't be too much longer, so I hope that you're enjoying it thus far, and I will catch you at the end. So watching back on this, I can say with certainty that the right-hand side looks much better than the left. I spent a lot more time on the details there, mostly because I could see more of the details there, but also because I just think that there was more variety in color, therefore it looks better. And also, interestingly, so I'm watching this on like a much smaller scale than a typical YouTube video, because that's just how my editing software is set up. And it looks much better zoomed out than it did when I was zoomed in. So if you are interested in seeing it in a different perspective, you might want to zoom your screen out a little bit. I would also be very curious to know if anyone is still watching at this point. Is this helpful to you? Do you enjoy watching real-time paint with me videos, or do you prefer more like sped up speed paints with, you know, either a less chatty version of a voiceover or, you know, no voiceover at all? I'd be really curious to know what your preference is, as I'd like to, you know, attempt to create some form of content that people are actually interested in. I do tend to create content that I like to watch. I've been watching quite a few of these real-time paint or sketch with me drawings, and while I do find that most of the time the artist has, you know, applied another like chatting topic to their video as far as what they're talking about, regardless, I do like seeing the real-time footage of them creating their art. So I'm curious to know. Let me know in the comments below, if you made it this far. If you are still watching at minute mark like 38, I'd be very curious to know. And also, you know, what types of, you know, speed paint type footage you prefer. Do you prefer the longer version or the shorter version? And, you know, is it helpful for you to see the real-time painting? Are you a painter yourself? I would love to know these things. Getting to know my audience a little bit. I'm actually honestly so surprised at the amount of views that I've gotten so far. And I'm really grateful that people are actually clicking on my videos and are interested in learning more about me and what I have to offer. So this is where the illustration gets a little bit bad. I did not do a very good job creating these reflections. Even looking back at like the real physical piece that I have, I absolutely hate the reflections in the water here. They are way too green and like way too splotchy. They should have been, you know, broken up with gray and blue and just made into like a choppier format, because water is a choppy reflective surface. It's never perfectly reflected. So although it does portray a little bit of choppiness, I think I should have gone back and made it even more choppy and like broken up some of the green with some other colors. So I'm a little bit disappointed at that, but I do think, again, this is all about learning to improve. You can see here I try to start to do that, but I just don't do it very effectively. And, you know, if I, again, were to go back and paint this again, I would try to make it look better. You see here I'm adding some splotches as far as the gray is concerned, but never did I go back and add some splotches to that green. And it really bugs me when I can like look back and see all of these things, but in the moment it does not occur to me. Now, I grant you, in looking at water from afar, like this is pretty far away from me, so I wouldn't be able to see like all of the ripples that I see there in the foreground, but at the same time I should be able to see some form of like difference in color there. So that was one thing that kind of bugged me about this. But I think that every artist kind of struggles with that. You know, we all are very critical of all of our own pieces, and something that we can absolutely love about someone else's art, we might, you know, absolutely hate about our own just because we aren't as effective in our own eyes at doing it. And yet when someone else looks at our pieces, they might feel completely differently. So honestly, I think that this is a pretty universal concept for artists, and I too struggle with this. I make art all the time that I think would have been better served in someone else's realm, or that I like tried something that someone else does and it just didn't come out as well as it could have. Sometimes I make a piece that I'm really happy with, and you know, those are the ones that you really you gotta hold on to and appreciate. Pieces like this really serve to teach you a couple of lessons, not only because it's like a new painting service, but also just because, you know, something didn't work out. Whenever something doesn't work out, that is when you are learning. And I know that that is true for myself and for every single other artist out there. We all have to just learn to appreciate our mistakes and learn from them. Now, that is obviously easier said than done. It can be really frustrating to continue to practice and practice and practice and feel like you're not making progress, even if you are. To that, I would just say, just keep going. You know, one more piece, one more attempt, and eventually, continuing on in that mindset, you will succeed and you will see improvement, I promise. I know that that's been true for my own artwork, and I've heard many other artists dealing with this struggle, so know that you are not alone, and you just need to keep going, and I promise you it will get better. At this point, I am almost done with the illustration. I just have a couple of more finishing touches. Again, I do wish that I had gone back and tried to blend through the water a little bit better. I think that I did a decent job in the beginning, making the waves, and then here where I am struggling to actually make the reflections, and over to the left hand side where I added all of the gray, I think that I could have really stood to add a wash of gray over the blue to make it more cohesive. Now here you see me again trying to adjust these darned clouds. The clouds bugged the heck out of me. I tried to add in a wash of blue for the sky in a different manner than I had before. I really should have probably used a more wet on wet technique for this, just because at this point I was not having any success at all using the wet and dry technique. And so, you know, learning again, more of hot press learning, I think that I just need to work on getting flat washes. So maybe I'll do a video on like comparing hot and cold press papers and, you know, examining different techniques using both of them. I think that might be fun and also very informative for anyone who is looking to try hot press paper and looking to, you know, expand their watercolor horizons, if you will. Again, really hard to like add water and make your paint move. For someone, you know, familiar with painting in cold press paper, it's not that difficult to do. So having that difficulty here was really a learning curve. And again, I really just want to explore that, I think, in maybe another video, trying out different techniques and explaining where they differ, because as you can see, I'm struggling. So I know that I would benefit from a video about that, so I think that other people probably would too. Please let me know down below in the comments if you would like to see that. At this point, I think I'm going to try to do that using, you know, this hot press paper and maybe my cold press sketchbook that also has 220 GSM paper, so that is a fair comparison between the two. Like I said, at this point, I'm almost done with this illustration. I have now failed to add a decent looking sky to this illustration, and while I don't like how splotchy and streaky it is. I dislike that the sky is so streaky because I like how streaky the water is. And you know, you can't have both. The sky is not, in realistically speaking terms, streaky. But beyond that, I do like how this piece turned out. I think that, you know, overall it does look at least somewhat similar to the reference I was using as far as, you know, a painting representation is concerned. And I am pretty happy with it. So let's see some close-up footage of what this looks like. As you can see, like I said, the gray tone is not very well mixed in with the blue, and on the close-up, you know, the colors are a bit distorted, but overall, again, I am happy with how this turned out, and I think that it's decent. Let me know down in the comments below how you think it turned out, and please feel free to like and subscribe to this video. I really appreciate you watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.